Hey, so doing a live again because what I've discovered is this is actually works. Because again, somebody with ADHD, I tend to plan it, and not do it. So we're just gonna do it. So that's why we're doing it live. And obviously, I'll have somebody come in and edit and things later. Um, and I was looking at where my camera is, and then what? That's what my world looks like. If you look at my table, I've got all these books I've got working on. I've got you see my broom. I was sweeping and I set it there and I haven't taken it in there. So like this is pretty typical with somebody that has ADHD. So I thought, like, let's just be real here. So you're getting it. And there goes Miss Izzy, as she walks through the camera shot. So today, this is the next installment of executive functioning, and what is it and how do we utilize it, and what does it mean for those of us that have ADHD. And I'm reading a book called Understanding Your Brain, Get More Done, and highly recommend this book. It is really, it's a simplistic, it's very short, and it actually, I think, will help a lot of us understand ourselves better. And when we understand ourselves and our brain, we can be more effective. So, as we all know, right, we live in a complicated world, right? You don't even have to have ADHD to feel like you have ADHD, right? This world has become so distracting that, everyone is working much harder to stay focused on what's most important while also trying to ignore what's most stimulating or interesting, right? We have things that we need to do, things that need to shuffle around, opportunities, and easy access to be, impulsivity. Oh, that's Facebook or social media or my phone dinged, all of those things. So, this is a challenge for everybody. How do we do the right thing at the right time most of the time? And, so not sometimes, but most of the times. Well, we have to filter out some of those stimulus or distractions, and yet things that we need to utilize to filter that out. How did it work last time? What worked better? What are all of my options? Is this in alignment with my goals, right? A lot of times those aren't the stickiest. Those aren't the things that necessarily grab our attention the hardest, right? So, matter of fact, it's actually the opposite, right? The distractions, they pull our attention harder. It's more fun, or it's more stimulating, or it's more this, that, or the other, right? So that's part of what makes it so hard to figure out, like, okay, this is what I need to ignore, and this is what I need to actually get done. And a lot of it is we're deciding among several competing tasks. So there's a book called The One Thing, and what's the one thing that I can do right now that makes everything easier or unnecessary? And yet, well, how do we answer that? And we're like, well, yeah, we need to do this and this and this and this. So keeping in mind, knowing is easier than doing. And ADHD, I love how he said this in this book. ADHD is a disorder of actualizing good intentions. See, people with ADHD usually know what the right thing to do is, and yet aren't consistently doing it as they would like to do or would want to do. So, and I'm sharing this because most of us already know what to do. We're pretty smart. So guilt-inducing lectures are rarely helpful, because they don't tell us anything new, right? And we already feel bad and guilt about not getting XYZ done. So it's more about what is the thing that we didn't know? What can we strengthen so that we can do more of the right things more of the time, right? So these are the executive functions. Working memory, right? We all use working memory constantly to hold information in our mind. As we remember, hey, what just happened? We relate it to long-term memories. We think ahead to the future. Working memory and attention work very close together. People with ADHD tend to have blinky working memories, which lead to those problems in our daily lives. So, an example of a blinking working memory, right? We walk in, we set something down, and we have no idea where we set it. So we were distracted. We're thinking about something else. Sense of time. People with ADHD have a difficulty monitoring the passage of time and planning accordingly. It's kind of pretty important, right? So as a result, sometimes we spend too long on some activities and we don't plan enough for others. So this contributes to some well-known challenges with time management and getting to places on time. And remembering to remember, right? We all have dozens of things to remember over the course of a day. People with ADHD have great difficulty reminding themselves of these tasks at the right time, often forgetting completely or remembering only when it's too late. Now, some of you guys are going, yeah, preach it to the choir. Keep in mind that one of the reasons that I'm sharing this with you is so that we're all on the same page. And then we're going to talk about in the next video, like, okay, what do we do about this, right? Because that's what we want to we want to learn. Okay, this is where so you might even write down, maybe you don't have a challenge with working memory because, right, we said everybody's executive functions are a little different, but you might have a challenge with your sense of time. Well, then that's the video that you're going to want to watch about. Or maybe it's the remembering to remember. We're going to talk about how do we put things in a place so that that doesn't become a challenge for you anymore. Emotional self-control. Now, people with ADHD tend to feel and express their feelings more strongly than others do, and are more influenced by their feelings than other people may be. So this affects our ability to see beyond our emotions in the moment and take others' perspectives into account. Now, in the moment, because interesting enough, a lot of people with ADHD, like, they are really in tune with what's going on in the world around them, even though sometimes it doesn't show up that way. For instance, maybe you're talking to somebody with ADHD and you feel like they're talking about something that's not where y'all started, and they may not even realize it, but they're talking about something else because they can sense that maybe you're not engaged in the conversation or there's something else wrong. And so we're gonna look into that. Self-activation. Now, all of us have to use a certain amount of force of will to get going on boring tasks. It's human nature, right? People with ADHD, we just have a much steeper hill to climb. So we tend to procrastinate until the pressure of a looming deadline forces us into action. Then you've got hindsight and forethought. So, right, we all use lessons from past experience to make better choices of the next time this happens. We also think ahead about the likely outcomes of different actions so that we can choose the plan that has the best success. Well, people with ADHD tend to react too quickly in the moment, and therefore we don't make the time to remember the past or think about the future. So it's just boom, boom. So there's more likely to make sometimes there's more likely for us to make optimal choices. And although we can intentionally choose to approach situations in a certain way, right? If you think about the executive functions, they operate without conscious awareness, like breathing. So think about watching a little kid talking themselves through a difficult task. They're verbalizing their executive functions. Maybe they're repeating themselves. Now, eventually it becomes automatic. I think of, if for anybody that drives a stick, or knows how to drive a manual transmission, right? So there's, think about when you first started learning how to drive that manual. You had to, like, I remember in my brother's little Ford Ranger truck, you would have to put your left foot in and press on the clutch and then the brake and then put it in first. The whole time I'm going clutch, brake, first. Let me ease my foot off the clutch, brake. So you're having to now eventually. You can drive that manual and put your makeup on. Not that I recommend that at all. I'm just saying, eventually it just becomes part of who we are, right? And yet, so that's kind of right. That's how executive functions work. So at the beginning, if we don't have that executive function, if we're not operating with that conscious awareness, like breathing, that's where people with ADHD kind of have that challenge. We might have to do that first neutral drive. Sometimes we skip that and go straight to the next thing. So, and now we're talking about some specific executive functions, but keep in mind that it can kind of get blurry because these aren't specific situations. They're all happening a lot of times the same at the same time. So we want to look to go, okay, how do we make it these things understandable and applicable. That's it. So we simplify a little. Now, the interesting thing about executive function is that people with ADHD, we actually use these really, really well, except when we don't. In fact, it's this inconsistency that's the hallmark of ADHD. Someone who has consistent struggles, that might be something other than ADHD. So, how do we explain that people with ADHD sometimes perform really well, yet at other times they make simple mistakes? I think about this last week. I'm coaching a travel softball team. And I knew what time I needed to be there. I had plenty of time to get there. I'm driving. I'm almost there. And that blinky working memory just shuts down. And I was like, oh my gosh, where I thought we had to be isn't where we thought. That's not where the softball field is. So I drove to the other softball field. And as I'm getting to the other one, I went, oh, that's just the guys. I'm supposed to do the girl when I know where they're going. So I go back to the other one. Killed lots all the time that I wanted to be there early. That's an example of like that working memory and how like we sometimes make these simple mistakes and how they impact. So the key to, and that's just, I'm sure everybody on here, you can give me 15 different stories of something very similar, right? So, because keep in mind, the key to successful decision making is that tiny little pause, because it gives our executive functions time to do their thing. So that executive function lives in that space between stimulus and response. So what happens in between? We get to choose this. Now, this is the thing, and people with ADHD, we get to choose this as well. It's just that people with ADHD have difficulty stopping long enough to create that pause. So we don't use our executive functions as reliably or effectively as others might. And then so we get distracted and forget things, or we leap without looking, right? So this kind of explains why we don't always do what we know we should do. Because we have challenges creating that pause that gives us time to make that well-considered decision. Okay. Now, so this is just all an explanation. We're all on the same page. So, so think about, if we're trying to get out of the house, but we may have trouble filtering out external or internal stimuli. And so we may react to the wrong thing or the least important thing. So we're running out the house, the phone rings, we get on there, this lengthy conversation, and now we're late to the next thing. It could look like bad judgment, and yet what really happens is that stimuli, the phone ringing, or saying, oh, we need to do this, it had too big of an impact on that ADHD person's decision making, so a less optimal choice was made. So it's not bad judgment, it was a knee-jerk reaction. There wasn't that pause where we stopped long enough to actually make a decision. And so then that leads to those dreaded, why didn't you? And why didn't you, right? And so some of the ADHD, I don't know, or I just didn't think of it. It's probably accurate. Their brain didn't stop long enough to get a chance to think about it. Because people with ADHDs or difficulties with response inhibition tend to make us vulnerable to being overly stimulated or overly influenced by external and internal stimuli, right? So there's some ways that we can manage this. So maybe it's setting a beeping alarm because that overrides the other stimuli so that we leave at the correct time to get there. Medications could be something for some of us. But keep in mind the whole just try harder doesn't work. It ignores that fundamental problem that people with ADHD have trouble creating that moment of pause. So, it's like telling someone who needs glasses, just try harder. You'll be able to see. Just squint a little bit more. It doesn't work, right? So it's a problem of the ability, not desire. Now, it's confusing, though, because people with ADHD usually have the ability to do the actual task, and yet they aren't as strong in that fundamentally ability of creating that pause, so then they don't do the actual task. Now, or they don't consistently do that actual task. Now, we're gonna pause here, and in my next video, I'm actually going to go through some strategies that we can utilize, because this is the cool part. It does get better. There are ways to change our performance, right? We can improve our abilities by giving our brain what it needs to function at its best. We can actively approach rather than avoid challenges, and yet we want to bring better strategies that are based in executive function. And we want to alter the situations that the demands fit with our abilities. So we're going to be talking about these things. So I hope that you would come along with me on this journey. Please subscribe and feel free to, write questions in the comments, or maybe you're going to share things that have worked for you. We'd love to know that, so that we can share it with others. So appreciate you, and thank you so much for anybody that comes in and watches this. Have a good one.